All right, I believe we can begin our session for today. I would like to, first of all, express a very good morning to all of our distinguished panelists and moderator for being here with us today. My name is Mariam Safi, and I'm the Executive Director of the Organization for Policy Research and Development Studies. And I would like to welcome our panelists for joining us for today's webinar. We have with us today Deputy Minister Dr. Saib Sardar Rahimi, Ambassador Omar Samad, Ms. Marzia Azizi, and Ms. Khadija Hussaini. I also have the great pleasure of introducing to you all our moderator for today, Dr. Saib Omar Sadr. For today's session titled Afghanistan-Middle East, Prospects and Challenges Towards Cooperation and Peace. This session is actually a follow-up to the previous webinar that we had held, and it's a part of a series that's based on the findings of the 5th volume of DROP's Women in Public Policy Journal that was all about looking at Afghanistan's regional partners in countries in fostering regional consensus on matters related to security. And so we're very happy that we can hold these series where we can take a more deeper look into some of these topics and issues, looking at the bilateral cooperation between Afghanistan and Turkey, Afghanistan and Iran, Afghanistan and Saudi, and Afghanistan and Qatar. Before I pass on the panel to our moderator, I'd like to introduce our moderator to you all today. Dr. Omar Sadr is the Assistant Professor at American University of Afghanistan, based in Kabul. Previously, he has worked at the Afghanistan Institute for Strategic Studies and the National Center for Policy Research. His primary research interests are in the intersection of culture and politics, democracy, and multiculturalism. He has earned his doctorate from the South Asian University. And I also want to thank all of the audience that have joined us from across the globe for today's event. Today's event is being live streamed on YouTube and will be available for viewing after the event is over as well. Dr. Sadr, I hand over the panel to you.
Thank you so much, Sophie Saib. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on wherever you are located. Welcome to the second DROPS webinar on Afghanistan-Middle East prospects and challenges toward cooperation and peace. I am very pleased to moderate the distinguished and young panel concerning this, the theme of this panel. Short note at the beginning that the language of this session would be English because we want to reach out to a larger audience, policymakers, not only in Afghanistan, but also across the globe. Before I move on to introduce my distinguished panel, I would like to end the topic of the session. Prospects for cooperation, and I prefer to call this region as West Asia, senseless from the Middle East, for instance, during the Bush administration, which included Afghanistan. Inclusion and exclusion is important here because based on Oli Weber and Barry Buzan's theory of regional security complex, a regional security complex is mainly defined based on the interaction of the countries within the region. So now if we define Afghanistan within the region, of course that complex and the patterns of cooperation and enmity will be different compared to that of exclusion. So that's point number one. Point number two is about security order in Middle East. Middle East is somehow completely different in terms of security order when you compare it with the other regions, like, for example, North America or Europe or Southeast Asia. And the case that Middle East is a kind of chaotic, anarchic, multipolar order, regional order. On one hand, you have Saudi Arabia, and at the same time, Iran, Turkey, and Israel. So you have a number of countries as a regional power playing very determined and so on and so forth. That's point number two. Now, when it comes to these countries, and when we say Middle East, these regional, so what role, for example, what are the stakes of Iran or Turkey and Saudi Arabia? And of course, Qatar, because it's a host for the talks between Americans and the Taliban and the upcoming talks. So that will be the main theme of this session, that we will try to unpack some of the main key debates concerning this. These respective countries, they have different stakes, both in conflict and in peace in Afghanistan. Their stake might be because of they are hosting the negotiation, or they might be hosting some of the leadership of the insurgents and the Taliban and their families probably. Thirdly, they may also enjoy some leverage in terms of financing and sponsoring insurgencies. Since 2005 till now, Saudi Arabia was active both at the state level probably, or sometimes non-state actors and rich sheikhs in the Persian Gulf region that they were sponsoring. So there are varieties of peace, who is a researcher at ATR Consulting in Afghanistan. So may I just request to have his remarks for 5 minutes on the topic of Afghanistan, Qatar, prospects and challenges toward cooperation and peace. Ambassador Samad, over to you.
Thank you very much. Good morning to and good evening to those. When it comes to its relationship with Afghanistan and the rest of the region, it becomes even more complicated. Obviously, the fact that Afghanistan has been in conflict itself for the past 4 decades has not helped the positions, and what we are seeing and experiencing are shifts in positions that have taken place over time. Let me just quickly say that historically, before I get to Qatar, historically, Afghanistan has had an interesting set of relationships with Middle Eastern countries. Before the war, most of Afghanistan's focus and close relations were mainly with Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and to some extent Kuwait. And after the war started in 78, 79, obviously the dynamics changed. Saudi Arabia started playing an important role alongside Pakistan. Egypt also played an important role, especially under Anwar Sadat, and was helping the covert American operation, helping the Mujahideen against the Soviets. So parts of the Middle East played an important role in the anti-Soviet campaign. Iran, obviously, it's difficult sometimes to whether include Iran or not. Some people do, some don't, but Iran obviously is part of the greater Middle East, and it has its own position because it's also a neighbor of Afghanistan, and it has very specific sets of interests that drive Iranian policy and has driven the Iranian policy over the years, and others will address that. But coming to today, before today, during the Taliban, we saw also another shift, and that shift was when at least 3 countries, two of whom were Middle Eastern countries, recognized the Taliban almost all the way up to the end, including Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. Then since 2001 and the post 9/11 period, obviously a lot has changed. Afghanistan has tried to return to a more traditional set of relationships with countries on a bilateral basis mainly, but also multilateral when possible or when necessary. Now, going and zeroing in on Qatar. Qatar has been an interesting player for not very long. Qatar obviously, first of all, has to be looked at in the context of its relationships with other countries in the Gulf region and in the Middle East. Qatar's relationship, which is somewhat competitive with the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, and at the same time, they have divergences of views on issues ranging from terrorism to the Arab-Israeli conflict to relations with Iran and a host of other issues on how to deal with extremism and economic interests have obviously created a sort of competition between certain Gulf countries, and Qatar has taken its own course. In terms of Qatar's relationships with the West, it has remained strong. There is an American base in Qatar, which is of strategic importance. And Qatar, in the Afghan context, did not recognize the Taliban during the 90s, and has since 2011 or 12 shown a keen interest in wanting to play a mediator's role, in a facilitator's role in the Afghan conflict, without really showing too much tilt or support to one side or the other. We do all know that initially in 2011 and 12, all the way to 13, Qatar and the UAE were somewhat competing over who was going to host the Taliban office. Eventually, Qatar was seen as the better choice. There were many stakeholders who had an opinion about it. It wasn't just one country or another, including the government of Mr. Karzai, who eventually decided that Qatar was going to be the location for the Taliban office. The United States had a role to play in all of that, of course, and so did many others. But since then, we have seen these, occasionally we have seen these tensions between some of the Gulf states over how to deal with Afghanistan. Now, Qatar and the UAE, to some extent, have shared venues and have allocated their facilitation mode to accommodate the talks between the US and Taliban. Let's not forget that not all the talks since 2016, 17, and throughout 18 and 19 especially, have taken place in Doha. They have also on 2 or 3 occasions taken place in Abu Dhabi. This is to sort of create a balance. Now, having said this, right now, at this moment, it seems that the focus after the role that Doha played in facilitating Taliban-US talks, as well as the agreement that was signed at the end of February, that the next stage, if and when we reach that stage of engaging in intra-Afghan talks, will most probably take place in Doha again. Whether that will continue as the location and venue for negotiations, which may take months and even more than that, maybe years, remains to be seen. There are other countries that are also interested in that prospect. Now, Qatar, again, does not seem to have a very specific strategic interest in wanting to play a role in Afghanistan, except for the fact that it sees itself as more neutral than others. And its history has proven that Qatar can play, has relationships with the Arab countries, as well as the West, as well as to some extent even Iran and Pakistan, and other stakeholders in Afghanistan. And inside Afghanistan, I think a lot of Afghan stakeholders also feel comfortable with the role that Qatar has played so far, even though there are some exceptions in Kabul right now where they feel that maybe they prefer to have some other country play a role. But in terms of, it's not just the geopolitics that drives interests of these countries like Qatar, but it's also, I think, to some extent, looking forward to the geoeconomic prospects of what Afghanistan can offer. There are a lot of countries that are interested in Afghanistan for various purposes. We think that the close relationship that Qatar has developed with the Taliban will probably in the future, if the Taliban become part of a political order, also help them further some of their economic interests in Afghanistan or in the region as well. Obviously, the relationship that Qatar has with Pakistan and the balancing role that Qatar wants to play between Pakistan and India, to other stakeholders in Afghanistan's stability and peace and war issues, also has bearing on the prospects of peace in Afghanistan, because I think the Pakistanis also feel somewhat comfortable with the role that Qatar has played so far, even though they also feel that the UAE can play that role as well. And so at this point, let's not also forget that Qatar has special relationships with some European countries that have an interest in Afghanistan, especially Norway. I think that Norway, which is also a country that has shown interest in trying to facilitate Afghan reconciliation process, has over the years, not just now, but over the years, aligned and coordinated some of its effort with Doha. And so you see some parallel between what the Norwegians and the Qataris want to accomplish in Afghanistan, and that may again help the role of these countries in the future if the peace process moves forward. I know there's a lot to talk about, and I don't want to take more time because others need to speak as well, but these are some of the main issues that I wanted to bring about Qatar, and we can further elaborate during our discussions later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Samad. Now, may I request Ms. Marzia Azizi to take over, and she is speaking on the role of Turkey and from Middle East and Afghanistan's peace and cooperation.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sadr, and hello everyone. It's a great pleasure to be among the panelists today. So I will basically talk about the paper I wrote for the Drops Journal, which is mostly focusing on Turkey's engagement in Afghanistan. I will quickly go and overview the key points, and will finally talk about the current development in Afghanistan and Turkey's relationship. Before talking about the current relationship, it's good to have a short overview of the history of relationship between Afghanistan and Turkey. First of all, Turkey has a long history of friendship in Afghanistan, which started in 1920s when Afghanistan was the second country to recognize the independence of the Turkish Republic. And Turkish relationship after Turkish support in Afghanistan after 2001 has been mostly in terms of security cooperation plus developmental assistance. These security cooperations of Turkey in Afghanistan have been part of the NATO mission, and they have not been directly involved in counter-insurgency operations. However, they have been involved in trainings and equipping of the Afghan National Army and Afghan National Police. Their development assistance have also been of importance. They have spent over $1.1 billion. Second point I want to notice is about the Heart of Asia Istanbul process, which is based in Istanbul and was initiated and was established for the objective of bringing peace and stability in Afghanistan and making the reconstruction process of Afghanistan a quick process. Among there are 14 participating countries, 17 supporting countries, and 12 supporting organizations, member of this initiative. I argued in my paper that this initiative has been less successful as compared to the potential it holds. It has the membership of almost all the regional countries. However, it has not been that successful that was expected of this in such initiative. This we say that because due to the conflicts of geopolitical interests of some of the regional countries, this process have been less successful. For example, the geopolitical conflicts between Afghanistan, Pakistan, US, Iran, and Saudi Arabia, plus for example, Saudi Arabia is one of the countries who has a lot of influence on Pakistan, who could play a good role in making this, encouraging direct communication between Afghanistan and Pakistan. Saudi Arabia didn't do this, and instead it is focusing on its war in Yemen. So mainly this initiative has been less successful. Though there has been some regional degree of consensus among these regional countries, but there has not been any multilateral cooperation for addressing security challenges in the region. In the paper, I suggested two solutions that could help a little bit to develop this regional consensus or increase it. The first one is to allow the broader economic integrations between the regional countries, and second, to have a joint patrol of borders and countering money laundering. So there are two most important aspects that can make Heart of Asia Istanbul process the best platform, or one of the most successful platform to be used for building regional consensus on building security in Afghanistan. Is that first, it has a membership of almost all the regions. Secondly, it focuses on every most important aspects, for example, political, security, and economic cooperations among the regional countries, while there are other cooperations or platforms, for example, RICA, SCO, who are focusing only on one of those aspects. I thirdly talked about Turkey's ability to facilitate talks between Afghanistan and Pakistan. So as you know, Turkey has a good relationship not only with Afghanistan but also with Pakistan. They have Turkey has played several times. They tried to play a mediator role in asking the two countries to come together and talk to each other. One of the successful one was in 2009 when, for the first time, military and intelligence chief from Afghanistan and Pakistan met for the very first time, and that was due to the efforts Turkey made to encourage both countries come together. Turkey has also suggested to have trilateral summits between the three countries, but that didn't happen, which was promised in 2019. We look forward for having more of these trilateral summits and gatherings. Fourth, I talked about Turkey's influence on Taliban. As you know, even now, Taliban are not interested to come to the Intra-Afghan Dialogue and talk to the Afghan government directly. There has been hesitations. So we understand that. I personally searched this and found out that Turkey enjoys a good relationship with Taliban, among others, mostly based on two events. First, when Mutassim John, one of the Taliban leaders who was assassinated and wounded as an assassination attack in Pakistan in 2010, Turkey offered him refuge, and then the Taliban leader accepted it. And also Turkey in 2012 suggested to have that they are ready to have a Taliban office in Ankara. That is helping creating more conflict in the region. They should any geopolitical issues. What they can do is to initiate at least to initiate discussions on Duran line between Afghan government and the Pakistan. Secondly, Afghan government should increase, or even the Turkey government can increase the trilateral summits among the three countries, which can happen with the mediation of Turkey. Third, we know that Afghanistan and Turkey's relationship is not as close as the Turkey and Pakistan relationship is. So what Afghan government can do is to increase this, to make this relationship closer with Turkey, and that can happen through frequent visits, diplomatic visits to Turkey, plus inviting most Turkish companies to invest in Afghanistan in different sectors. But finally, I suggested that Turkey can also encourage Pakistan to bring pressure on Taliban and to make them come to negotiation tables with Afghanistan and welcome these intra-Afghan dialogues that has not happened yet. With the current situation, I would say that Turkey has not played a very great and very noticeable role so far in the peace negotiations of Afghanistan. With the recent meeting that Abdullah had with the Turkey's president, though Turkey said that they are very in favor and in support of ongoing efforts to bring peace and stability in Afghanistan, but they didn't specifically say what they can do for this process. The only thing they said that we should increase our trade and transit volume between the two countries. So overall, this was my findings from this paper, and would like to have questions from Dr. Saib and any other panels who are interested. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I suppose still we don't have Dr. Sardar Rahimi, but I can move on to the third speaker, who is Ms. Khadija Hussaini.
Ms. Khadija Hussaini is also reconnecting Dr. Saib Sadr. So maybe at this stage, if you have any questions for Ambassador Samad and Ms. Azizi, we can ask those until they join us.
All right. So, okay. So let me then come with the questions. Ambassador Samad beautifully had an overview of the relationship between Afghanistan and Middle Eastern countries before the war and also post-war. You also spoke about the particularly Qatar's relationship and how that has been shaped. The relationship between Qatar and Afghanistan has been shaped based on the context and competition of Qatar with other regional countries. And then finally, you highlighted that Qatar has a geo-economic interest rather than geopolitics primarily in this process. So now the question is that what are those geo-economic interests that Qatar will get benefit out of peace process in Afghanistan? Are you just referring to to some of the economic supports that they will receive from the United States, or there are many more?
Thank you. I was referring to geoeconomic interest as one aspect of overall Qatari interest in the region and the region that Afghanistan is part of. Geopolitics is also another driver. And I think that Qatar's relationship with the rest of the Middle East itself is a driver, in the same way that I tried to say that its relationship with the West, and especially with the United States, is also a driving factor in its interest shown to Afghanistan. And even, you know, there are pipeline issues involved, gas pipeline issues, especially between South Asia and the Gulf region that Qatar has been involved in. So this is where the Pakistan-India relationship comes into play. The whole Iranian issue is something very sensitive in terms of Qatar's position, in contrast to the UAE and Saudi Arabia's position, for example, in wanting to play, again, a more neutral role in the whole tense environment that exists right now. Knowing that Qatar, at the same time, as I mentioned, is an important, has an important American base on its soil. And so that puts it in a very awkward and different position. As far as Afghanistan, I think that there are several countries in the Gulf, especially the UAE, where there is a large Afghan migrant population and worker population with ties to certain parts of Afghanistan. There's a lot of economic activity that taking place with the UAE, but not so much with Qatar. And Qatar may want to be and is interested to expand those relations in the future. And we also don't know, you know, this whole issue of post-conflict, post-peace development, and the fact that Afghanistan wants to open, for example, could be open for investment, especially in the mineral sector, could in some ways, I think, attract some countries that either have a need for certain minerals or certain commodities, or want to be involved in the investment part. We know for a fact that Afghanistan's rich underground resources can be a factor for stability, but they also can be a factor for, unfortunately, conflict or more conflict if it's not managed properly. And I think that countries like Qatar want to play a constructive role in that regard. Their special relationship to the Taliban, obviously, for them, is a bonus, and they want to capitalize on that. But at the same time, they are open to having good relations with other Afghan factions and groups, and that is why they are pushing hard for a negotiations process. Now, I think Ms. Azizi mentioned something about the Taliban not being interested so much in wanting to pursue the path of peace or the path of intra-Afghan talks. From what we hear from Qatar and Qataris, and not only just the Taliban, but those who have been in touch with them, or some Americans, we think that the Taliban are pursuing a two-track strategy. Track one is, let's try to give talks a chance to see if we can then come to terms with other Afghans over the future of Afghanistan, especially over power sharing and how to create a new order. I think that that interest within the Taliban is real. I don't think that it's just you know, a pretext. At the same time, the Taliban, as we have seen over the last 25 years, are very much a militant group, and they also know how to use conflict to their interests or to further their interests. So the question is, do we think that it's best for Afghanistan to take advantage of an opportunity for talks and an arrangement, a political settlement, or do we think that it's best to continue to fight and see who at the end wins and who loses, and it's a zero-sum game objective that may last for many, many more years. And I think that this is where we stand right now, a decision between more conflict, where one side wins and one side loses, regardless of whether the international community is still involved, the United States is still involved or not, or the prospects of peace talks. And I think that right now, every Afghan has to think very deep and hard about what the opportunities and challenges are down the road.
All right, thank you, Ambassador Sam. To Ms. Azizi, you spoke about how Heart of Asia was a failure as a regional initiative in order to bring consensus concerning the peace in Afghanistan. I would like to ask that how do you think that the United States could play a role to push the region or in order to activate some of these platforms, particularly Heart of Asia, to play a more constructive role, either probably, for example, as a track to construct a kind of consensus and bring the countries together to deliberate and unify their perspectives when it comes to peace in Afghanistan.
So basically, I was focusing on Turkey's role. What you just said that what US can do, I would focus on what Turkey can do. So we know that Turkey is a participating member of this initiative, but US is a supportive member. So I would say that US, with its strong relationship with majority of these regional countries, can push them can push them to reach a regional consensus. But what Turkey can do is much higher than US. Though US can support that, but I would suggest that Turkey should take this initiative. So basically, with increasing mostly economic interactions between the regions, especially the regions that are having most of the conflicts due to their geopolitical interests, I would suggest that economic cooperations can be one of those platforms that can increase the regional consensus.
All right, so I think we still don't have the two other speakers. They have not been able to join back. Maybe I just have one more round of questions to both of our panelists. Ambassador Samad, Afghanistan has been trying to convince the neighboring countries as well as the region that there is a security threat from the standpoint of terrorist activities in Afghanistan. So in order to convince these countries to cooperate the peace process. So far, this such kind of initiative was not successful. To a certain extent, one can understand that most of these regional powers in West Asia, they do not perceive any kind of primary security threat posing to their national security from Afghanistan. What do you think, how can Afghanistan move forward when it comes to creating such kind of narrative and also socializing some of these regional powers and a certain security order so that they can cooperate with peace process in Afghanistan?
Well, the issue of security in counterterrorism and the threat of terrorism has existed for quite a while. I mean, I remember, I'm old enough to remember the pre-9/11 times, when some of us were discussing this threat of terrorism in the forms that existed back then, and where Afghanistan had become a hub of terrorism, and not many people were paying attention to that until 9/11 took place. Then we saw a totally different transformation of international engagement, intervention, and cooperation. Remember, for many years, up until a few years ago, the international community has had a consensus on Afghanistan, on how to rebuild Afghanistan to some extent, with nuances and differences, on how to deal with the threat of terrorism, especially after the re-emergence of the Taliban around 2004, 2005, and then the TTP emergence, as well as other groups, especially the emergence of Daesh in the Middle East, and then later the different versions of Daesh around the region, including in our part of the world, in the Afghan-Pakistan region. So what we see is a transformation and transition from stage to stage in terms of security threats that are happening. And this means that countries in the region obviously have to take position in according to these changes that have taken place. The purpose of being in Afghanistan was to defeat terrorism. And it looks like that purpose has not been accomplished, or that purpose has failed and has now changed into some type of redefinition of what is a primary threat, what is a priority threat, and what was a threat that can be contained. So now for some, the Taliban are a threat that can be contained, and with whom you need to come to a political arrangement in order to end that particular part of the conflict and make them part of a new order in Afghanistan. For others, they still want to see the Taliban as a continuation of terrorism, and they see them as part of still a larger network of threats, and they want to use that for political reasons or for security reasons as a reason for continuing a military engagement in Afghanistan. And so then you obviously have reality on the ground. And I think this is what is missing. We need to refocus on what the reality on the ground is. What has changed since 2001? What does the threat assumption or assessment look like right now in terms of the different groups that are operating, their linkages? How deep are these linkages? Are they strategic, or are they tactical? Are they temporary? And which state actors are involved in this, in which obviously non-state actors are playing a role. What we need to do is to diffuse the situation instead of escalating the situation. And so this is where Afghans have to decide again between a prospect for peace or a prospect for more war. Diffusing means offering a new solution, a security architecture, where Afghanistan does not have to be a battleground of a half a dozen proxy wars. If we want to continue to be a battleground and a battlefield for a half a dozen other proxy wars, and for all kinds of terrorist organizations with roots to other state and non-state actors, then this war in Afghanistan, which has lasted 40 years and 20 years, will continue for another 20 years. If we want to make the decision that this country has suffered enough and needs to breathe freely for a while and needs to develop and progress, then we need to differentiate between what is a real threat, an immediate threat, a terrorist threat, versus something that can be dealt with politically. So if there are elements that can be dealt with politically, we need to probably take that route. And when there are elements that cannot be dealt with politically, and they are actually a real threat to us and to others, then we need to agree collectively to fight it. because as soon as you divide everyone, then again it becomes a proxy situation. And so I'm very concerned about the fact that we are fed narratives right now that sometimes are not based on reality, and we are missing opportunities that may diffuse the situation in Afghanistan instead of escalating it. And escalation in Afghanistan means many more dead Afghans, more destruction, and less unity and less cohesion towards a political settlement.
Move on to Khadija Hosseini, if you can hear me. May I request you to deliver your short speech for 5 minutes on the topic that you prepared. Ms. Hosseini, can you hear me? Do you have my voice?
Hello.
Hi,
Hello.
I can hear you.
Hi. Hi. Thank you, Dr. Sadr. After many trials, we finally managed to get back into the call. I'm thankful for that. And thank you, Drops, for organizing this event. In this short presentation, I'm aiming to discuss Saudi Arabia's role in shaping security of Afghanistan, its concerns regarding security in Afghanistan, how its policy towards Afghanistan's neighboring countries affects Afghanistan, and what can be done to harness Riyadh's constructive role in peace process. With peace deal signed between Taliban and the US and the possible full withdrawal of the United States troops, a concerning question and a rather important one is what will happen to the power vacuum left by the US. Will Russia take over? That might be the subject of another discussion, but what is the role of regional powers? I think there was a very fruitful discussion about this. But would Afghanistan be another battleground for regional rivals, Saudi Arabia and Iran, maybe, and their allies, who all look for a play influence to the vacuum that is created by the US? On what role Saudi Arabia plays in Afghanistan, we have to look at its foreign policy, actually. Saudi's policy towards Afghanistan is shaped and continued to be influenced by three main factors: its ideological ally, the Taliban; its regional rivals, Iran; and its strategic partner, the US. Saudi Arabia is one of the US's closest allies in the Middle East and has backed the Taliban since 1980s, along with Pakistan and the United Arab Emirates. Saudi Arabia was among the first countries that recognized Taliban as a regime in 1990s, and has been a major funder of the group, both on and off the record, as we know, through private fundings. Therefore, being on both sides of this political fence has allowed the kingdom to maintain a significant role during the peace negotiations with the Taliban since 2008, when the talks about peace began firstly, and the initiator was actually the Saudi Arabia. This also shows that peace and security of Saudi Arabia is dependent on and highly influenced on the gains and losses that Afghanistan brings specifically, and also the Islamic world in general. Essentially, Riyadh views the Taliban as a leverage, as I have talked in the paper published by the Drops as well, to be used against the US and also Iran, while maintaining close ties with the US to ensure that it is on the same page when it comes to their common enemy, which is also Iran. On the other hand, Saudi has legitimate concerns regarding the security in Afghanistan, which revolves around its legitimacy of leadership in the Arab world, its economic, geographical, and ideological rivalry with Iran. Besides that, the ideological rivalry is a serious problem. There is a serious security threat from Iran posed on Saudi Arabia. Iran has, as we know, reportedly forged a closer relationship with the Taliban, which after many years of covert cooperation and operation finally came in light in 2016. And since then, there are serious allegations against the joint support for Taliban towards Iran and Russia by US in recent state declarations. There is also Saudi Arabia's relations with Pakistan that we cannot ignore. Saudi Arabia and Pakistan have developed extensive economic, cultural, ideological, political, and military security relations since Pakistan was founded as a state. This joint involvement goes back during the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, but also has stretched till now. Two main factors that makes these both countries codependent to each other is the military power and nuclear capabilities of Pakistan, which addresses the strategic needs and requirements of Saudi Arabia to counter the threats that is posed from Iran. Also, the limitation of economic limitations of Pakistan that makes Pakistan in need of Saudi's assistance and support. A good proof to this claim could be the what we know as Islamic Military Counterterrorism Coalition, known as IMCTC, a joint effort between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan to further their closer military cooperation. And also there is this recent generous investment of Saudi Arabia and Pakistan worth around $20 billion to improve Pakistan's economy. Keeping all these in mind, what can be expected from Saudi Arabia regarding Afghanistan would be the next question. For one, utilizing Saudi Arabia's influence on Pakistan would be one thing that Afghanistan government could do in basically to remain a close, to ensure that Saudi Arabia remains a close ally to Pakistan, while at the same time keep Iran out of the picture. That would be of a foreign policy interest for Saudi Arabia, which of course depends how successful Afghanistan can be in convincing Saudi Arabia to play this role. And of course, the gains for Saudi Arabia is obvious in this regard. Another strategy could be harnessing Saudi Arabia's assistance to dry out Taliban's financial resources and encouraging them to, that would encourage them to join the peace process. Financial resources that the Taliban receive from private sources in Saudi Arabia are crucial to the group's operation and activities, and policies and measures to limit this flow of money and resources could be effective in applying pressure on the group for them to join the process or to make less noises actually in the peace process that is going on. Also, we have some very good mechanisms and platforms in place, I think, that should be taken into account to be used through diplomatic channels to bring the Saudi Arabia more effectively in the picture. For example, we have the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, known as OIC. It's a platform which Afghanistan should be able to convince Riyadh to find regional solutions for Afghanistan crisis in. This was also reflected in many peace plans being put forward by different political parties that we recently reviewed at AAN. Most of these peace plans acknowledged the need for a regional consensus and an agreement on non-interference commitments from the regional players. This was suggested, but it wasn't clear in what platform and how it should be done. So OIC can be the answer for that vagueness and unclarity. Kabul can also take advantage of the Kabul process for peace and security cooperation, what we know as Kabul process, where Saudi Arabia is a participating member in this common platform. And then in the declaration that they had at the end of the conference in 2019, they explicitly called for security cooperation among participating countries. So Afghanistan could build on that and could follow up on that to ensure more aware, more informed decision making in these platforms. I think these platforms in place are, if being taken seriously, and if not just a symbol of some activity that the government has done and hasn't followed up, would be a very good tool to address the issue of peace in Afghanistan. Thank you.
All right, thank you. For the peace process. However, being a weak state, which enjoys very less capacity, Afghanistan has not been able so far to utilize such kind of platforms. These platforms either have been hijacked by the regional rivalries or exclusion of one of these regional powers, which has finally led such processes to failure. Having said that, what are key solutions for Afghanistan? And what are the leverages that Afghanistan may have in order to have a successful foreign policy toward Western Asian countries? I think you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, I was saying that for now, at least, we clearly know that Iran has been involved directly with the Taliban, and the foreign policy of Iran towards Afghanistan and towards Taliban has changed since 2014 and even before that. Having said that, Iran is the main rival in the region for Saudi Arabia. I think that would be the answer on how to approach Saudi Arabia in this regard. If there is a close relationship between Taliban and Iran, Saudi Arabia would lose its contact with the Taliban, which is its most supported ideological supporter and also friend, and Pakistan also as a very close ally to Saudi Arabia would be in the picture in this regards. So playing this card, I think, and would help Afghanistan to bring Saudi Arabia on the table and to make them listen to support Afghanistan in these platforms. As I said, OIC can be a great platform, as Iran is a part of that platform, Saudi Arabia is, and also most of the regional countries and Middle Eastern countries are part of this platform.
All right, so I have one last question. Any of you who is interested, maybe you can respond to it. As the region is quite anarchic, and you have spoken about how there are divergent perspectives and interests. Can you flag some of the key areas where the region or some of these regional powers may have consensus concerning the peace process in Afghanistan? Ambassador Samad, you can respond to this, or if anyone else is interested to.
Yes, thank you. I will just say that I think the presentations today demonstrate something very clearly, and that is that whether you call it anarchic or chaotic or anything, we live in a region that is that has different views and interests, and sometimes they clash, sometimes they contrast, and sometimes they actually align with our interest. The problem is we have not been able to define our interests. By our meaning Afghanistan interests. You see, other countries, even as small as Qatar, yes, powerful and rich, but even as small as Qatar, or others in Central Asia, their policies and strategies are driven by their defined interests, national interests, and then obviously regional interests, and then international interests, and the overlap that has to be created between these. But we, as a war-afflicted country that still is in conflict, have yet to come to terms about what those interests are from an Afghan perspective. We are very much, unfortunately, fragmented within, so it is very difficult for us to claim that we can influence others. We cannot influence even ourselves, let alone others. We have to be very realistic at this stage and stop the narratives that are being fed by power mongers and warmongers that basically tell us that it's black and white, and that we are able to do this and we can do this. And you know, we have to look at the limits of our abilities and the leverage, as you mentioned it, the leverage that we carry, and how to best use that, either by ourselves or in conjunction with those with whom we have shared interests, whether it's the US or anyone in this case. On counterterrorism, where is our shared interest with other countries? On countering narcotics, where is our shared interest? On pursuing geoeconomic interest, where is our shared interest? And how to basically diffuse the situation, because I'm not exactly sure how we can reach some kind of stability, if that's the goal. If stability and peace and then an opening for progress and development are the goals, how do we reach that? Do we continue fighting and killing and destroying, or do we have to at some point come to terms with some and fight others who really are spoilers? We need to identify between those who are spoilers within us and outside of us versus those who may have the potential to be a threat, but at the same time, with whom we can come to terms on shared interests. We don't have a lot of time left because we already have spent too much time, and the world has spent too much time with us, and the world has spent too much money on us. The world is no longer going to spend time or money on Afghanistan. I think we need to realize these things. Okay, so it's important to be able to find out in foreign policy how to find these commonalities and how to build consensus and how to solve problems instead of deepening the problems and the issues. And for that, we need new ideas. We cannot repeat the same things that we've been doing for the past 20 or 30 years. We cannot be talking about the same structures and the same mechanisms that have had no result whatsoever. Okay, so we need to have new ideas, new thinking, and we need to do it in consensus as much as possible and stop undermining each other. We are too busy undermining each other in Kabul and then undermining others, and others are busy undermining us, each for their own interests. And so we're not moving forward. We're just sitting still and spinning wheels. And so this is not a very good situation for any country, let alone a country that has suffered for a very, very long time. So the diplomats in Kabul who are spinning wheels and repeating the same things actually need new thinking. And our leadership in Kabul also needs new thinking. And the political elite need to realize that we have reached a very precarious situation in Afghanistan, where the world can no longer afford to continue this mission. And if they do, it's only for certain purposes, very specific purposes. And the burden is on us Afghans mainly to come up with solutions that work. And that means solutions that are based on realistic issues and realistic solutions. So I will stop at that and hope that that will be enough food for thought.
Thank you, Ambassador Samad. So I think we have reached to the end of the session. So before handing over this back to Ms. Mariam Safi, few words of my takeoff from this session. I think there is a greater interest when it comes to playing some role in peace process in Afghanistan within each of these individual countries and regional powers in the West Asia. Qataris are interested, Saudis are interested, Turkey is interested. However, they are also defined their behavior, and their steps are also defined by divergence of their national interest. And that has been a real challenge for Afghanistan to how to bring all these divergent perspectives and divergent interests together. So far, there are so many challenges. Comes to the first question that tries or describes the security cooperation, it's really difficult to generalize something. And it's all about individual countries and region and how they have been shaped their relationship with Afghanistan. And that goes back to the point that the region is quite divided, and it's a multipolar regional order. The exit of the US and the NATO may also pose certain opportunities and challenges to each of these countries, but in a different scale and scope. It depends on how they perceive the US interest in the region. With that, I would like to thank all the panel members for their time and their contribution to this panel. It was really enriching and a learning experience. I hope to see you more often again, but now I will hand over this to Ms. Mariam Safi.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sadr. I must underline your statement that we had a very enriching discussion today, and all of the expertise that was shared gave us lots of food for thought. Things that I think we will take back with us, like you mentioned earlier, Dr. Sadr, that in today's session we were going to unpack, but now we have many more points in front of us that now deserve further unpacking. And with the region that we live in, the divisions that exist in the region and is existing within a multipolar system as a whole creates its set of difficulties and its set of challenges, of course. But I want to reinstate a point that was made by Ambassador Samad, that was very poignant, that the discussions today do demonstrate that we live in a region, as in many others, that holds different views and different perspectives and interests, and that these, I liked how Ambassador Samad put it, that they clash at times, they contrast at times, and they align at times with the interests of Afghanistan. And what we need to do from our side in Afghanistan, considering that we are still a country that is in conflict, is to be more clear with our interests, to define these interests clearly, to understand our limitations and set realistic parameters for these interests, and to also, most importantly, leverage what we have as a country to offer our partners in these bilateral cooperations that we engage in to maximize the interests for both involved. And so having said that, I'd like to thank everyone once again. Ambassador Samad, thank you so much for joining us today. Ms. Marzia Azizi, Ms. Khadija Hussaini, and Dr. Omar Sadr, thank you so much for your wonderful moderation.